Hello and welcome to another episode of It Came From the Page. And today we're going to be talking about alien books. These are things that I talk about a lot, but I don't think I've ever actually done like an official, just kind of sat down and reviewed some of the ones that I've read. So this is all of the alien books that I actually read this month. For some reason, I just ended up reading a bunch of them. So let's get into it. These will actually be in chronological order. Wasn't intentional, but these kind of went up there. I was trying to cram in some of the very new books because in January I'm hoping to do like a series of best books I've read, best trashy books I've read this year, all of that good stuff, best short stories. So I have a whole bunch of like fun, well, I find them fun. People might not enjoy them, but I'm going to do a whole bunch of top tens for what I read in 2022 in the in January. So I thought I want to crack open some 2022 releases that I hadn't got to yet and get to them. And quite a few of those were alien books because I collect them. So if you don't know what I mean when I say alien books, these are books that are based off of the Alien franchise, which is a film franchise that started in 1979, directed by Ridley Scott. This is one of my favorite movie franchises of all time, and interestingly enough, I think the books are incredibly varied and have some really, really good stuff in them, to the point where I think that, these are what I normally use to talk about things that would defend the movie tie-in genre from being labeled as trash. I just think, people throw around that word a little bit too laissez-faire when it comes to movie tie-ins, and I think some of these are just great books. So fight me, as always. But starting off, let's talk about one of the earliest books on the list, and that is Steel Egg by John Shirley. So John Shirley, if you don't know, he is a fairly acclaimed horror author. He did a lot in the Paperbacks from Hell era, and then he has actually kind of popped in and out of various franchises to do movie tie-in books every once in a while. This is actually the first John Shirley book I read, but I actually read another John Shirley book this month, which was his Halo book called Halo Broken Circle, and that was a much better book than Alien Steel Egg. So Steel Egg is not a terrible book. I don't think it's awful by any stretch of the imagination, but I don't think it's very good. I think this is probably the kind of book people would be expecting when they hear about movie tie-ins. These are not going to change your mind. But the plot is essentially this takes place it takes place in the future from when it was written, but in the past of the Alien franchise, even farther back than either Prometheus or Covenant. Both Prometheus and Covenant, which are the prequel films in the Alien franchise, hadn't been made yet by the time this book was written. So this was supposed to be a book that was going to explain how did the company and how did Weyland-Yutani know about the xenomorphs ahead of time. So that idea, that interpretation of the movie Alien, that when they got the directive to check out the planet, the company knew what was there and what they were trying to harvest. So this was supposed to explain how they knew about it. Essentially, this book is very, very clearly written in the early 2000s. Literally, there's a ship called the USS Al Gore, and it's like, oh my goodness, this does not date well. There's references to like mad cow disease, all this stuff that like when you are creating extrapolations by using science fiction to talk about, usually about the time you're living in, it is very clear when this book is written. And I don't think that's a huge downside of the book. I just think that's kind of amusing in that it's like so very, very clearly written in that very early period of the 2000s. And I think that, this book overall, it feels more kind of like a Roger Corman B movie ripoff of Alien rather than kind of reaching the heights of some of the other books that we're going to be talking about. It has some really good action. I think actually one of the strengths of this book is the action is great. The main plot is that it takes place where there is a United, I forget what they call it, but it's kind of like a United Nations space vessel that is going around near the moon, one of the moons of Jupiter, I believe. And they are kind of going through, and they heard a mysterious call from a object, and they go to investigate it. It ends up being an alien ship that's kind of been remaining in the orbit of this gas giant. And oh no, the commies are also coming, and they also want to have a claim on this first example of alien technology. And from there, it really is kind of just becomes like a very big B movie. There's again the action pretty exciting. Some of the the violence is actually really like whoa. You could definitely tell Shirley comes from a horror background. Let's just say that, because some of the things that happen in the book, you're like, wowzus, that was crazy, and oh my goodness, like that was unexpected and incredibly brutal. So if you're just looking for like a fun, breezy time, Steel Egg is definitely not the worst thing you can do. But it's also like very dated, does not hold up super well in the modern parlance. So just be aware going in. It's very clearly written by like what passed for being a liberal in the early 2000s, which still had a lot of problems, and of course it still does today. But just keep that in mind when you go in. Next up, the next book, and this is Alien Out of the Shadows. So this is by Tim Leben. I really like this book, but you have to just suspend your disbelief when you're reading this book. This is actually the first Alien book released under Titan Books. So when Titan got the license, this was the very first one that they released. This is actually an interquel between Alien and Aliens, so it presupposes that on that journey at the end of Alien, when Ellen Ripley gets put into stasis, at one point during the in-between of her being lost in space for all that years, she is rescued and has more xenomorphic shenanigans, and then something happens to mess up her memory so she doesn't remember it, and then Aliens happens. You have to have a pretty big suspension of disbelief for this to even like make any sense, like for it to even work for you at all. You just have to be like, okay, I'm just gonna let this happen. And I think once you do get a very fun book. One of the things that I do really like about this book is that it has Ripley in it, and Ripley is written pretty well. Like it's pretty convincingly lines that you would have heard Sigourney Weaver say in an Alien movie, in my opinion. And I think that really does kind of make the book extra fun to read in that regard. Especially because like most of the Alien franchise doesn't have any Ripley stuff other than like the novelizations, right? So Ripley doesn't get a lot in the expanded universe because her entire life is very clear cut that you see in the movies, right? There's not really much ifs, ands, or buts. So it's fun to get a kind of an interquel. Alien Out of the Shadows was also made into an audible original dramatization, and that one is like really good. They did some really good work on dramatizing the events of the thing. So I had listened to that before, but I never actually read the book. So reading the book was quite interesting. Has a lot of my favorite tropes of horror. There's stuff happening on a mining planet. You get xenomorphs that are from non-human species. Let's just say that. And there's some like mix-ups of like, ooh, what are they doing? And yeah, I don't think any of the characters in Out of the Shadows, other than our main character, who is Hooper, none of the characters are that well fleshed out or well drawn. They do kind of survive an extraordinarily an improbable amount. There are characters who get injured and then they're still around for a amount of time where you're like, I don't think that they would have survived this. They would have probably been taken out earlier. And they seem to actually be more competent than the Marines and Aliens as far as of taking out xenomorphs. And they don't even have actual weapons. They're like using like mining gear and stuff. And like if you're willing to kind of just go with it and have fun, it is really fast paced and exciting, and it goes like boom, 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 and there's not a lot of downtime in between it. Some of the deaths in this again are quite enjoyable and quite fun. It's just it seems like the xenomorphs are a little underpowered in this one. In Shirley's book Steel Egg, they're kind of a little overpowered because they get shot and it just like doesn't work because they're like armored carapaces and stuff like that. So throughout these books, like the amount of consistency as far as like what can the xenomorphs take and what actually affects them, it varies a lot from book to book. So Out of the Shadows, it's kind of like feels like they're kind of depowered a little bit, which is funny because it's an alien book, not an aliens book. So there's like a little bit of, as far as branding goes, aliens books usually end up being more action based, and alien books end up being a little bit more horror based. And usually when they're more horror based, the xenomorphs are a bit more stronger. But regardless, all of that is kind of just into the weeds of this discussion. But yeah, Alien Out of the Shadows is a fun read, especially if you liked Ellen Ripley and you just want to spend more time with her. And of course, you just have to turn your brain off a little bit in terms of actually fitting it in the chronology of the series, and just kind of be like, okay, I'm just gonna go with it. And once you get on the ride and you go with it, it is quite a good time. Next up, this is actually an Aliens versus Predators. Wow, Aliens versus Predators book, which is interesting because usually it's Alien versus Predator, so it's interesting that this is Aliens versus Predators. Regardless, this actually came out this year. So this is actually co-written by a husband-wife duo, which is Yvonne Navarro and Western. There's the last name there. I don't want to mispronounce it. But I have read books from both of them. So both of this duo have done their own alien stories. Yvonne Navarro actually, in the early days of Bantam, which was a series of alien books that were actually adaptation of the comic books. Yvonne Navarro did do a few of those. She's also done a bunch of Alien and Predator short stories. Weston, I've read, he's done a few short stories in some of the Predator books, and he's also done his own Alien story. It was not the best. The Aliens Infiltrator, I believe is the name, and it was not the best. But surprisingly, I really dug this one. Again, you're not gonna change your mind as to the quality of tie-in books from reading a book like this. This is very much like a Predator-filled action movie. And I really had a good time with it. There is a lot of like POV from the Predator perspective, and basically the plot is there is this group of this hunting party of Predators, and they are trying to teach like the new baby Predators how to hunt and how you do that in Yautja. That's what they call them. That's the species name. Society is you send them up against xenomorphs, and once they kill one of the xenomorphs, they become blooded. So there is this whole thing about there are these three hunting parties with these three leaders who are elder, more experienced predators, and they are showing the younglings how this works. So basically the plot is you have somebody who comes in, seeds this planet, puts all the xenomorphs on the planet, and then the younglings come along with their hunting parties, and they're supposed to like destroy all of this and earn honor and all of that. And so things go a little bit awry when you discover that the predator seeding this planet has a little bit more extra in store for the hunting party. And that is probably where everything kind of like changes and gets altered in this. There's also some humans, and like humans are not overly likable in this book, but in such a really interesting way, because what the plot is of when all this hunting is going on for the predators and the aliens, the humans on the planet are this drug cartel who has indentured servitude for all of these people who are in the throes of addiction, and they have them harvest the drugs for them because this planet has a set of like flowers that if you harvest, you can transform into drugs and that kind of thing. And they have them go and harvest that, and then after they do so much harvesting, they'll give them a hit, and then they'll go out and do it again. And it's really kind of harrowing for all involved, because like the people who are like the mercenaries who are in charge of this group, they're basically just looking after enslaving people, and in a way that makes none of them enjoyable to read. And I was a bit worried about being able to, because sometimes when people write about people who are addicts or have addiction in their blood, with people who have addictive personalities, who are in the throes of something like drugs, drug use, drug abuse, some people can just not write them as a human. Like, they kind of forget the humanity involved with that, and they don't really have any sympathy, and they just kind of don't treat the characters with any level of respect. And this book, for the most part, does. Like, when you finally do start to get the POVs of the people who are these indentured servitudes, and you kind of get their history, and you kind of like figure out how they ended up in this position, and it's presented like very much like, it felt real, it felt empathetic, and you really were kind of rooting for them at the end of this book, and you really just like hoped that they could get off and they could get clean and they could get their lives back together. And it just really kind of impressed me from a book that's mainly kind of like a cheesy action movie kind of book, is that it is kind of anchored with some very empathetic portrayals of people in the midst of abuse. Now, the ending to the book is very mean, and it kind of pulls out the rug a little bit in terms of what I was just saying, which it simultaneously I think works, but also it's like, oh man, I didn't like that. I don't know if I like that very much, because it works in the story, and it is like a realistic exploration of where the story would lead. I was just hoping for a happier ending for some of these characters, and you don't necessarily get that, but oh well, it is kind of a mixture of action horror kind of book. Some of the other things about this book, you will probably take a little bit of getting used to if you have never read a book like this, because the Predators speak in a very specific type of way, and they have all this cultural stuff, and it can be kind of a little bit jarring, kind of getting their POVs, because they don't talk like we do, and like there's all this like extra things, and I think it's all kind of detailed pretty well in here, but it does take a little bit of time getting acquainted with that. There are some weird description of the fauna and flora that the xenomorphs like kind of like implant. There is this thing called the Riftwing, which is kind of like this bug-like creature. And the entire book, I was trying to figure out what these things actually looked like, because like they got described in a lot of very weird ways, and I was just like, I really could have just used someone to just put a picture of them in this book, because I was like, I can't envision how Riftwings are supposed to look because of this description. Because at one point someone is like, oh, they have these big long proboscises, but they also have monkey faces, and you're like, what is going on? And they got like dragonfly wings, and you're like, my brain, and like their eyes are supposed to be like segmented bug eyes. So I'm like, where did anyone get the monkey faces from? I'm so confused. So I'm just trying to figure out what these things look like. That is kind of like a nerdy ass nerd thing though, because I think once you in your head make it so that they look in a certain way, then you're fine with the rest of the book. It's just trying to get that original, wrap your head around like, what do these things look like? And yeah, so the action in this, really, really good. Like, this has some great action, really fun, really some great sequences that are described super well. And you can kind of tell, Western, I know, was a military person. You can kind of tell with how this is written, in that like it's very much like understanding about how combat works, both in real life and how to write good combat in fiction. So yeah, if you're just in for like a good time and looking for something fun, I would definitely recommend Aliens vs. Predator Rift War. And last, but certainly not least, I just finished this yesterday, and this is Aliens Vasquez. So this is by V. Castro. This is one of those books that I think is like a must read, and I think is one of those books that does kind of elevate the movie tie-in subgenre, and shows when it can really, really present something unique and interesting. So I've never actually read a V. Castro book, but I've heard great things about V. Castro. I will certainly be reading more. And I rewatched the movie Aliens before doing this. So in the movie Aliens, like Vasquez is a character I've never been a huge fan of. Um, and then I found out why maybe I was feeling a little bit disconnect of that character, because Vasquez in the movie is played by a white woman in brown face, and the character is written by a white man and directed by that same white man. So you have basically a caricature of like what it would be like to be a Latino person in the military. So that's not good. Like that's one of the things that like Aliens I think is a really fun movie to watch, and I do enjoy that movie quite a bit. That is really the one kind of black mark on that movie, and in my opinion, one of the black marks on the entire Alien franchise is that portrayal. Because come on, just hire a person of color. It's not that hard. And it was not that hard back in the day. Come on. Like, most movies are made in Los Angeles. Come on now. So it's just, so it was very interesting to see what V. Castro would do with this book. And if you look in the acknowledgments and the final little piece that she writes at the end of this book, you can tell that this is a book that she wanted to write. So she actually pitched this to Titan Books. And it talks about her going through Christopher Golden, who's like another writer and who has worked with Titan Books a bunch, and like getting him to introduce her to the community at Titan. So this is clearly a passion project book. The writing in this is really, really good, really, really strong. V. Castro turns a caricature into an actual character. Now, some stuff off the front as we get into this book. First off, only the first 80 pages are the background of Vasquez, the character from Aliens. The other, like, 320 pages are all about her children. So if you're only going in this expecting to experience that character, you're going to be a little bit disappointed, because that's only the first 80 pages. Now, it's a great fucking 80 pages, and it actually makes a character who I'm kind of mixed on. I loved her by the end of this book, and I loved her by the end of her little portion, and I think V. Castro does a great job expanding her as a character and making her interesting and talking about her story. Just flat out great writing. So I love that first 80 pages, and then they introduce her kids and how they grow up. And again, really, really strong writing. I really, really like the intricacies of these two kids. She's had twins, and they're being raised by her sister, and Vasquez's sister, Jeanette Vasquez, the character, her sister, when she has to go off in the Marines. And wow, like, it was really good. And like, all of these character stuff is like extremely impressive. A lot of this is actually light sci-fi. You could almost call this a YA book, if not for some things that happen in the later half of the book. Because for the most part, it's about them growing up in the alien universe. And what I really like about this, it's almost like light sci-fi in a way, because there's only like a little bit of sci-fi elements kind of like woven in, and it's a little bit more subtle than you normally get with a book of this nature. The big problem with this book, I feel, is like the last 60 pages. What you get in like the first 3/4 of this book has like very, very little alien action. Almost none. There is just some brief vignettes of some people testing and doing some stuff with xenomorphs, but xenomorphs are not running around, they're not running amok. There's no action in this book, which again is gonna be surprising if you've coming in with this with the Aliens moniker. as the front of the book says and what it's based off, right? Because Aliens is a balls to the wall action movie. That's what it is. And this is a very, very contemplative, well done, well written YA book for the majority of it, growing up in this alien universe. And I was loving it. I think you could have done this book without any xenomorphs in it, and I would still be very, very much into this book. And that's because I really like the world of Alien, right? Because half of my reason for enjoying this franchise so much is the world in which it's set in. And V. Castro really fleshes that out in some unique ways, takes a look at it from a lot of angles that we've not seen before, and does some little bits of character writing and exploration that really flesh out that world. Reminded me of one of my other favorite Alien books, which is Alien Covenant Origins. And that book was actually written by Alan Dean Foster, who did like all the the first, who has done 4 of the novelizations, and that was his first original Alien book. And it was great, and it featured no aliens, and it was just world building. And that book is great. I love that book a lot. And for the most of the runtime, I actually was reminded of this book. This book reminded me of that quite a bit. The problem is at the last 60 pages, it takes that book and then all of a sudden crams in alien stuff at the end. And it felt to me like it was 2 books that were crammed together, but most of the book is the one book she wanted to write, and the second book she was like, oh, I have to put alien stuff in here. Because it felt like if you had ended this at maybe about 350 pages and then done a sequel where she was able to kind of flesh out the attack, the alien attack that happens in this book, it would have been so much better, because it just seems like she is trying to fit the entire portion of an alien book, right? She basically tries to do all like 300 pages of something like Alien Out of the Shadows and does it in 60 pages, and all of the nuance and all the fun stuff that is in there has to get truncated because you just have to be like plot, 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 plot. And it just kind of was no fun. Like it was not very fun. And what's more is that V. Castro creates a lot of really great twists on the xenomorph, and makes this entirely new queen in such a unique and fascinating way. And that character and that creature like gets maybe 10 pages of writing in this 420 page book, right? Like it's one of those things where I'm like, this is so interesting. This should have just been its own book. And just kind of match that out and put that on its own. I don't really blame V. Castro for this, because like I would imagine it feels like this was pitched as 2 books and they only gave her 1 book. That's what I would guess. And again, it's not terrible. Like I don't think it's absolutely unreadable, those last 60 pages. It's just nowhere near to the level of that first huge portion of the book. And as such, I still recommend this book overall. Like, it's great. I really do think there's some amazing examples of writing and prose in this book. It's just that last third that I don't think works very well, unfortunately. So yeah, those are just some Alien books that I've been reading lately. Have you read any Alien books? Do you agree or disagree with any of my takes? Let me know in the comments. And hope you guys have a great day. Goodbye.